Greetings, gentle readers, fellow earthlings. Reading Foundations today, April 10, 2026, with Ross Finlayson, myself. Will be yet more the study of the reading in Foundations, where continuity and infinity make for the Euclidean and Archimedean, the super Euclidean, super Archimedean. That this is a usual sort of account, and it's figured that reasoning agents themselves can arrive at it. I'm wearing a necktie today. I have a collection of about 50 or more neckties. Most by now, which would be vintage in terms of the tonsorial, with that being with regards usually enough to hair also. For example, the other day, that springy pink Madras plaid tie, it's a Barnes. This rep tie, I imagine it would be called, with the kind of a black and white and a silver and gold and a little purple stripe. This is a shin lever tie. This jacket is a Fred. All my other jackets are, and most all my ties are Ross's. So that's a usual enough mention of then that the hats we wear and how presentation intends to go is that the necktie does serve a purpose. It basically controls the blood pressure of the is about the jugular, and in times past it has a function beyond merely conformity in these kinds of things. So that's said. It's just something I thought would be a mention then. So let's take a look at the books. Where we're at is there's been reading from a library I've collected of then as would be considered the canon, the dogma, and the doctrine, and then that most of these works are modern or 20th century. It is with regard to the 21st century. For example, looking at the last episode from the Xingtang Yao's book, this one called The Shape of a Life, about Yao and Yao Calabi, and talking about Kaluza Klein and Klebsch Gordon much later, about Calabi and Yao, and about the accounts of dimensionality, and then the manifolds as with regards to the analyticity and the periodicity and the purity everywhere with regards to the commutativity and the reductionism-cancellation, reductionism-correction, which are accounts of reductionism-truncation and reductionism-approximation, about how that then this anti-reductionist sort of account makes for where, much like any other kind of analysis of fields and including motion, after the Lorentzian, Henrik Anton Lorentz and the Lorentzian, and then for that being after the Laplacian, the second partial derivative, the sum of that in the various dimensions of space, the space-like, or as with regards to time, almost always usually just the one time variable, t, and the Lagrangian, for example, parameters everything by t, that the Laplacian, thus the Lorentzian, is a partial derivative account. And so it's a half account. The interacting terms and the implicits are to be included and re-included. And so the theory has kind of exercised its applicability, and that the account of the differ integro and the integro differ bring back, with Duhamel principle providing an anomaly non-zero, the little ends of the doubly infinite power series together, vis-a-vis usually enough the big ends, that these ways, then this counts of space inversion for the counts of space contraction, can make for a more thorough going account, has that thusly the entire stack of derivations that always is given as physics' account today, and for both relativity theories after the Newtonian and the quantum mechanical after the atomic theory, is having that thusly there's a way to kind of fix it from underneath, because it's already otherwise piled so high, and as of its limits of this house of cards of this partial differentiation, merely partial and a half account, that it's astable in a sense. And so the account of greater stability, where equilibrium is always seeking equilibrium and always at equilibrium. Here is for this sum of histories, sum of potentials, least action, least gradient account, with global isotropy and asymptotic total anisotropy, defining why gravity in the middle between general relativity and quantum mechanics then lives for free and without doing work for free, the perpetual motion machine, constantly violating the conservation energy and the energy budget, which neither quantum mechanics nor general relativity by themselves can make do with. So as to why there's a doubly objective relativity theory and a continuous quantum mechanics again, and for these stringlets, as for what make for the accounts of the measurable of these things, this repeatable, observable, and falsifiable the theory. It's called science. And then the measurable is the quantifiable among those. The quantify is overloaded between comprehension and taking into account things like numbering and counting, vis-a-vis to give numbers to things, magnitudes, the real analytic and for real analytical character. That thusly, this sort of anti-reductionist account is a very realist, structuralist account, of which there is one. So that's the usual kind of way of things here. So this next book's about Karl Popper. So Popper is a 20th century philosopher, and he said some things about science. And so the notion of falsifiability for the theory basically reflects on the account as after like Ronald Elmer Fisher or someone in statistics who we kind of give an attribution of the statistical method for the statistical hypothesis. That nothing's ever predicted or proved in statistics, it's just not disproved, and there may be some confidence in the expectation values after the likelihoods and the likelihood of the estimators of random distributions, and according to a strict adherence to the theory of probability and the theory of statistics and the statistical method, that thusly that's a truly unknown the distribution, and it's overall an unknown distribution. With regards to then, of course, any number of models of distributions, the mathematical functions, usually enough the probability or cumulative or the moment generating these functions, with their particular real analytical character, vis-a-vis the standard and non-standard probability distributions, that the area under them equals 1, and so that selecting a random number from infinity will give a fair sample from this distribution, just like flipping a fair coin gives a random sample between 0 and 1. That then for the account of science and after the account of statistics is both of them, those are the same. Science doesn't prove anything, it's just not disproven a given theory on any given day according to the energy and configuration of experiment. Then over time, as those add up, both in not being contradicted, then it enters in kind of the certitude of the things, or certification, sometimes it's said. And that being an empirical account, meaning it's just kind of commonsensical and doesn't astonish or provide surprise about things. Has that then the theory of probability always includes then also for chance and uncertainty, so that the then theory of probability, where then there's always a random distribution, then also makes any kind of sampling, measurement, or observation is also of its own account of those being unknowns and random. That in the usual account of the pseudo-random has always that nominally non-zero account after the reductionism, truncation, or approximation, as to why that then when Karl Popper's account of science is to make for that it's thusly a conscientious, this kind of strict definition of what science is and for what statistics are, is that statistics don't lie and science doesn't lie. Yet it only intends to not be falsified, not to be verified. For the verum, the verum, and the truth of things, and the certum, the certitude of an accounts of these things. So then let's take a look. This is O'Here's Karl Popper, Anthony O'Here, The Arguments of the Philosophers, edited by Ted Honderich. Printed in Great Britain, editor Ted Honderich, Reader in Philosophy, University College London. The group of books, of which this is one, will include an essentially analytic and critical account of each of the considerable number of the great and the influential philosophers. The group of books taken together will comprise a contemporary assessment history of the entire course of philosophical thought, already published in this series. Plato, Meinong, Santayana, Wittgenstein, Hume, Descartes, Berkeley, Kant, the pre-Socratic philosophers, or I would call it the, usually enough, the Eleatics, Russell, and Socrates. So the Barnes's pre-Socratic philosophers basically has all the fragments of that survive, and so is a close reading of those. Then there's Kant, and so that would be variously read. And then Descartes, of course, is pretty great, and Plato is Plato. And then otherwise, these are kind of the accounts of the logicist positivism, and I don't need their accounts for any matters of this thea-theory kind of account, except as making examples of them, as examples of partial or half accounts. So this book has an introduction, additions and abbreviations of Popper's works. Popper's conception of epistemology, or the meaning, has the central problem of epistemology, initial opposition to justificationism. So among all these isms, after logicist positivism and scientism, and then nominalist fictionalism and the fallibilism, and that being for accounts of pluralism, because all this fragmentism has that here there's structural realism, so structuralism and realism, and anti-reductionism is kind of a holistic monism. That then as to why somebody like Winston H.F. Barnes or Collingwood early in the 20th century stand up to make for the idealistic tradition and idealism and the analytical tradition and the techno-analytic logicist positivism, which is here given a stronger account and made science by an analytical treatment of the idealistic tradition as from axiomless natural deduction and these kinds of things. The other day I decided to say, well, take this kind of thea-theory, the A theory, axiomless is true, and then how it's to be discovered as from void and universals, making for an account of point and space for geometry, and increment and partition for numbers, and metonymy and metaphor for words and language, and then for a logic, the prior and the posterior, or as the universal and existential, and as for terms, predicates, propositions, relations, thoroughly. So that's the Hino theory, each of these different theories interpreting each other, and it's its own theory, and it's inside itself. This dually self-infraconsistency to begin, the dually kind of tandem, the self meaning as independent and existent, the infra-consistency vis-a-vis inter and intra, the infra-consistency, that the dually self-infraconsistency, dually self-infraconsistency, then makes for how consistency and completeness can arrive from that. And so before even there's consistency, is just I counted the dually self-infraconsistency. So I set this up, and as of among a panel of reasoners, or I just got a bunch of AI bots in a row, Cloud and Kimi and ChatGPT and Google Gemini and Grok, say, are these being regularly available offerings that have been around and will be around for a while. And then that just starting a panel and then just kind of pasting along, and there's comments in a row, so establishing an order so that ChatGPT could comment and Google Gemini could comment and Kimi could comment and Grok could comment and Cloud could comment, and then I would comment. And then just kind of pasting the round as it rotated so that everybody had the same view of the conversation and the order proceeded as sort of a panel discussion. They all arrive at that this is the account of what foundations must be, es muss sein in a sense. So what that means is that, and for the sense of meaning, like epistemology and semiotics, for Umberto Eco's great account, has that thusly the theories of truth and is discovered again. So in the classical tradition, like Aletheia and all these philosophers would be familiar with that. That's the way of things for thousands of years. And then like the Augustinian and for the scholastics and the adherents to the Greeks. And of course we would give the idea that the Greeks themselves were yet to panel. And they got all these influences from the Egyptian and the Sumerian, the idea of this, the pre-Noachic and the ante-Diluvian, the accounts of the Atlantean here, as after the Bronze Age, or the wisdom, as after Purananta and Thoth and Maat. The word Maat, M-A-A-T, it's an Egyptian word. It's where we get mathematics. It is what math is. And these kinds of things. And then for logos, which is around since before the Proto-Aramaic and the Phoenician and the Greek and otherwise, 6,000, 8,000, 10,000 years ago. Then that this sort of account is thoroughgoing, the paleo-classical. And then for the postmodern, after all these accounts, for example, as O'Hare here is describing as 20th century philosophy, the technical philosophy, that then this is that the panel arrives at then this sort of thea-theory, T-H-E-A, thea-theory, and so that thea has two roots, one with regards to the deity, another with regards to the vision. So kind of like one is like the purpose and the causal and the teleological, and the other is as of the sensational and this sort of account. That theory itself, the word is already loaded with that. So making it thea-theory as for an account of what's an axiomless natural deduction, given principles of inverse to subsume and be the sublime for principles of non-contradiction, the law of excluded middle, and the principle of this thorough reason, the sufficient, thorough, fulfilling, and fair reason, for otherwise the principle of sufficient reason, whatever works, has made it so that then thusly this account of the axiomless theory, truth theory, makes for this all these other accounts interpreted in it, like the Euclidean and the Archimedean, and then as the super Euclidean, the super Archimedean, that they hold together in the modular and meet in the modular after these analytical bridges, the ponts, that otherwise the inductive impasses are guaranteed to find and follow and fail, that The accounts of these reasoners rapidly and readily converge to why this is so. And under extended and repeated rounds of the thorough, further found it strengthened and its questions considered and addressed and resolved as to why then that's considered the candidate for foundations, if there's to be a theory at all. And so it's considered, for example, like how can it be a theory of everything vis-a-vis a theory of always? So the reasoners kind of made an account. It's like, well, like after axiomatics, then that gets lost in the complete and the compactification and the completions of these things after the continuum. And then also the account of just going along, or the becoming, is after Hegel makes in the Wissenschaft logic, after being in nothing, the account of becoming and going along. Then the A theory then is either the axiomless-axiomatized in the account of an ordinary theory, or the always becoming is for what is just constantly turning over the theory. Both of those are just fragments and examples then inside. Otherwise, the A theory, the truth theory, as it's put. And the theory is having that truth is conserved, and the quantity in this Comenius language, which is strong metonymy, of which then this Coleridge language of the mathematical metaphor make for the accounts. Then equipping the reasoner with the noumenological senses of an object sense, a word sense, a time sense, and a number sense, and a sense of the continuum, also makes sure that the intersubjective has access to the super-Euclidean and super-Archimedean in the intersubjective, ticks all the boxes about the requirements and desiderata of anything that a foundations would be. So it's a theory of everything always, and always everything. And any constant, consistent, complete, and concrete theory, it attains to that. Then there's one further distinction that is made to help clarify these things, is that thea-theory is thusly this theory. And then the vera-theatheory is, for the verum, is the unattainable part that is truly ideal and absolute. And so that's given to be the super and the natural, and otherwise is of the account that is an ideal. And then the analytical side is the certi-theatheory, C-R-T-I, so vera, V-E-R-A, and certi, C-E-R-T-I. Certi-theatheory is basically the scientific account, then, the study of it, and the reading. And so thusly this one theory combines the idealistic and the analytical traditions, thea theory, and that's a fair descriptive name, and rests for its own account in the language of the studies of it. And then the vera-theory is, well, if you have to look at it from the perspective that that's incomplete, then there's a complete one. And the certi-theory is like, well, if you have to look at the theory that this theory, while analytical, that empirically, inductively does complete, then that's for science in the account, while yet having access to perfect mathematics. That's the thing. So thea theory is a theory of everything and always. And if we're not quite sure yet exactly what that is, then for science and then for physics, then that's the exercise, is to make an axiomless physics and explain why that is so. So that's kind of given as unrefined. And then the account of the human condition in matters of judgment and compromise vis-a-vis decision, and honesty vis-a-vis conscientiousness, and the confessing liar and the fair judge, and these sorts of accounts. As for something like Solomon's default judgment, half, next. These sorts of accounts then help express then, when otherwise the role of philosophy is to explain the human condition, as with regards to the ennobled reasoner or the bête humaine, that here as well is that there's a philo-casuistry or philo-casuy, as I put it, where it's like this is the explanatory factors. This is the technical import of philosophy is reason, and then that for the ethos and pathos, so as being accounts of rhetoric, and for what's involved with rhetoric and ethos and pathos, that the logos is the greater account for reason, and then the kairos is always in time. That reflects well on this idea of the silver thread or the shastra, the merest, briefest causality in teleology, the idealistic tradition of time, and then that the word is that there's an account of words and language, that these utterances that we speak and share, finite, have all their body relation, and so in the Comenius language are infinite apiece. It starts at infinity. These are the sorts of accounts. So as a philosophical account and a philo-casuistry account, this makes for so that that's why large, competent, conscientious, cooperative reasoners won't need it any other way. And that for the great minds think alike, and a great mind thinks. Is it so? Yeah. So that's fun. Talking about Kuhn. So Kuhn is very much, Popper is very much after Kuhn. Falsification, scientific explanations. And so Kuhn, though, is an empiricist. And so that said, for the system of the world, and thus these kind of thing, the comparison between Einstein's theory of gravity and Newton's provides a case in point, according to Popper. It is simply false to say that the transition from Newton's theory of gravity to Einstein's is an irrational leap, and that the two are not rationally comparable. Well, Einstein's is once a reductionism and projection, that geometry is motion in perspective and projection. And so Einstein's account of relativity theory as that, well, among the system of the world and all the absolutes, motion is relative, then can make for an account of why that. Otherwise, he says, and it's Newtonian in the limit, giving that the gravitational field equations are just accounts that match up to Newton's. Yet having that the tensors let out and that the geometry is let out. Those being baggage to make it so that he can claim that it's like relative motion is relative, and there could be mass energy equivalency, and that the space-time is curving, so there's a cosmological constant. That Einstein's two axioms are, as in accords, following this mass energy equivalency and introduction of a cosmological constant, like this Duhamel principle's constant in the middle. It's infinitesimal, yet non-zero or oscillating. That then otherwise the account that is Newtonian is that Einstein has this pole gravity, or Newton has this pole gravity, and Einstein has this follow gravity, that it follows the geodesy or the world lines, the world sheets as they would be, the path of least resistance, or according to least action. Then how it gets that way, the space-time curving back and forth, is that it's the geodesy constantly instantaneously evaluated everywhere. And Einstein's gravity is just always straight down, vis-a-vis Newton's, that it's always between any two massive bodies at all. And so to say that Einstein's is Newton's is true. Then that it's from different matters of perspective and projection why it's so. And then as whether it's irrational is that it's not irrational, yet it does involve both expansion of comprehension and restriction of comprehension. Because when there's expansion of comprehension by saying that motion is relative, then there's expansion of comprehension to make so that it's taken into account how it would be like to so. And for example, for rest or motion, because 0 meters per second is infinity seconds per meter, counts for space inversion, and then for space contraction, that being real, make for so that Popper's account of Newton in terms of Einstein has it Popper says, and that the two are not rationally comparable. On the contrary, there are many points of contact, such as the role of Poisson's equation and points of comparison. It follows from Einstein's theory that Newton's theory is an excellent approximation, and vice versa, except for planets or comets moving on elliptic orbits with considerable eccentricities, or not even addressing the highly relativistic, the highly nonlinear, and the relativistic dynamics and apparent superluminal motion that is the sky surveys of the day have definitely established is about everywhere they look. So that's fun. In addition, Einstein's theory of gravity is embedded in a general theory of even greater scope than Newton's, says the author of this Falsification of Scientific Explanations. In practice, such comparisons will be infrequent, but they must occur. Theories do not usually map onto each other so closely and so satisfactorily, with all or even most of the indications pointing in the same direction. That said, they have their the antipodal asymptotic differences. So for one, it's like after Poisson's equation has that Poisson deserves an examination and re-examination, just like Hooke's law, Clausius and Clapeyron, and Arrhenius and Kelvin and Planck, and that Poisson is basically before Kelvin, and that then in its account is after the Laplacian. And so the Laplacian and Poisson, and then that attachment to things to do with the quadratic, then for the triangle inequality, and then for the inverse square, and here for the cube wall, make it so that where they disagree at all, they go opposite directions, and that's the flexibility afforded by otherwise this consideration of things is to give an analytical room for these kinds of things. Hence the fruitfulness of scientists coming to disagree on the potential of competing theories and working on both. So to do that, we look to avoid pluralistic fragmentation and synthetic theories that make inconstant definitions, because that's just nonsense when you start putting together every which way. Aristotle won't be made a fool, and Aristotle reads every possible syllogism every which way in a thoroughgoing account. But what the relativist has to show here is that theory preference in judging either the present explanatory power of competing theories or their future potential or both is necessarily arbitrary. So arbitrary is another word that has two distinct meanings that are opposites. So like entropy is, and the Aristotelian entropy is that trees fall down, and the Leibnizian entropy that trees grow up. And then for the dynamis and dynamis, for example, is power and potential, one active, the other at rest, or something like that. That arbitrary is once it reflects on the judge, the arbiter, and then also as with regards to whether arbitrary means informed or arbitrary means random. And so here, the account of the word arbitrary is that oftentimes people will say arbitrary is like it's like flipping a coin. It's random. It's arbitrary. But the arbitrational, for example, arbitrage, the exchange of currencies, currency arbitrage, or the arbiter, the judge, have that it's not random. And so when the author says here that it can seem arbitrary, it's like, yeah, well, that's to be judged, is the idea. At this point, the relativist will go to the heart of his and Popper's position on the theory-ladenness of all world pictures, including their observational components, and say that the sort of comparison claimed by Popper to obtain between Newton and Einstein is simply not possible because there's no theory-neutral ground available on which to base judgments of explanatory success and potential. Or is there? So the panelists, included a discussion about the definition of the arbitrary and why it is not. talking about Kuhn, a swinging stone, example of a constrained fall and sought as ascend as a pendulum. So here that would speak to Hooke's pendulum vis-a-vis Foucault's pendulum. Because Hooke's pendulum is an account of what would be the infinite things added up to make the finite. It's got a truncation in the component. Whereas Foucault's pendulum goes around as the Earth spins around under it, that it's its own frame and shows that it tracks the courses of the extra local. So the pendulum and then the spring and these kinds of things, these are the most usual sorts of things that are then given accounts of wave motion, where the wave is modeled as a couple different things. So the wave here is a model of change in an open system. It goes, the wave. Whereas a particle is a model of state in a closed system. So it's known that physics is an open system, yet all considerations of finite bound and extent are as of closed systems. So that physics is an open system, it has that, otherwise the accounts of conservation and continuity are in terms of closed systems, because it's constant inside the closed. And outside in the open is where any other account of a violation of the conservation energy wouldn't necessarily be that there's an opening or a perestroika or the catastrophe of these things. Catastrophe not being a bad word here, usually meaning doom, but here just meaning the opening of things, for like anaphora and cataphora, those terms about the analytic and synthetic, that where this dually-self-infraconsistency brings this the branching and the inversions to alternations to make in diversity and variety for minimality and maximality principles, the metamality, that then the dialectic is the synthesis of the thesis and the antithesis, either in both ways of those, and making the broader, fuller dialectic. So that about physics and the open and closed and conservation or continuity, the continuity laws are wider and more thorough and more in the entelechy, all the connectedness of the energy. Then conservation laws accounts for Noether's theorem of symmetry and conservation as for invariant theory. For the quasi-invariant, that waves are usual models of things. And so that then looking about these of the pendulum then has that there's as well for the semi-infinite and then the infinite and these kinds of accounts. So that's useful. By contrast, we see a pendulum, a swinging body repeating the same motion over and over again. The extent of swing depending on the length of the chain rather than on the heaviness of the body. That's a great account of the isoparametric, say, for the circle. The account of the axiomless geometry as well, how do you get straight lines in perfect circles out of this point in space making a spiral space-filling curve and infinite dimensional continuum? Or that being in one dimension, just line drawing from point A to point B. So we're like, well, it does. It's like, well, just to find least distance, instead of that the shortest distance between a straight line, 2 points is a straight line, say that a line is the shortest distance between 2 points. That being the segment, and then just extending that to make the regulus of thusly the geometry. That then it's not so dissimilar then from the accounts of what how does a circle have isoparametric theorem in all dimensions? It's like, well, it's kind of a great account that it does, and that's geometry for you vis-a-vis the numbers and the integer lattice. The data, how phenomena are perceived, are transformed in a paradigm shift. Kuhn compares such transformations to those shifts of vision undergone by subjects of Gestalt experiments and suggests that this may be why scientists who solve problems by articulating new models often speak of lightning flashes or of scales falling from the eyes when describing their first moments of vision shift. Or being able to put them back on and see the difference. for Wertheimer, this was the phi-phenomenon, which basically is an account of the stroboscopic, meaning that kind of like Einstein's frames, and when picture shows are first thing, and the moving picture or motion picture was able to be given an account as a sequence of frames up to a frame rate that is imperceptibly discontinuous. It has here that then this accounts of Wertheimer's phi-phenomenon is not so different. And then here, Wertheimer is read from Productive Thinking, his book about space inversion, and then also his study of Gauss, and then a study of Galileo, and his meeting and his study of Einstein, whose greatest contributions to the theory are mass-energy equivalency, and that can be made in accord that that's an ancient sort of cause. Energia itself is kind of that's again the ancient theory. What goes up must come down, and these kinds of things. And then the mass-energy equivalency and the cosmological constant. When the account was that Einstein was working out some formulas that ended up giving the ephemeris, the apparent motion of objects in the sky, as by a model of their elliptical orbits, the orbifold everywhere. That an orbifold makes as good an account of geodesy, just kind of looking at it a different way. That the cosmological constant was introduced, and then he called it a blunder. He's like, I put that there because for a couple years that looked like it would make it so that the account for the sky survey, and just given relativity theory just that extra nudge to show that it was falsified and otherwise an account of the Newtonian by itself. Then has that now it's also kind of this asymptotic anisotropy as to why when saying physics is an open system, physics is an open system in the entire total, or as if Einstein put it one time when he was talking about being against the probabilistic or indeterministic view of the system of the world or the theory. He said God does not roll dice. It's not arbitrary. But the idea is that if that doesn't happen all the time, it's like there is this spark or this root probabilistic flaw of the asymptotic anisotropy of the universe. The physics is an open system in the total. And so that shows itself back up again in accounts like quantum mechanics. For example, asymptotic freedom in the middle of strong nuclear force in the middle of an atom, in usual accounts, or momentum getting lost in the wash for the virtual or fictitious and the real forces since Lagrange, and all these kinds of things. It's all one theory still. And then for that, waves is models of change in an open system, and particles as state in a closed system. That it's known that the quantum mechanics, or the most fundamental and elementary of the accounts, it's given to be that if it's going to be of the smallest, lowest, and nearest and weakest of the ranges, is particle wave duality, and then above that, wave resonance dichotomy. And so the data, how phenomena are perceived. What Kuhn is claiming is what scientists and the rest of us are not in a position to judge between competing paradigms, because what they see is determined by the paradigm within which they work, usually within which they have been brought up. So here that includes the entire paradigm of like inductive inference vis-a-vis deductive inference, and why there needs to be the analytical bridges which establish the point preserving, these bridge points or ponts, this is an account in this thea-theory that analytical bridges, or Analytische Bruecken, make for accounts of why otherwise the entire account of the standard linear curriculum is built up on just following the red dot. And here there's pure diffraction and the decoherence of image and light, for example, that make for that the arrow spot is a red dot you can't follow. But it can be arrived at analytically why it exists and where it exists, and you can always see it. That these are the kinds of things. So Kuhn says, Kuhn, K-U-H-N, a philosopher in science, physics. As a result of the paradigm-embodied experience of the race, the culture, and finally the profession, the world of the scientists has come to be populated with planets and pendulums, condensers and compound ores. Compared with these objects of perception, both meter stick readings and retinal imprints are elaborate constructs. This is not to suggest that pendulums, for example, are the only things a scientist could possibly see when looking at a swinging stone. So anti-reductionism. We have already noticed that members of another scientific community could see constrained fall. But it is to suggest that the scientist who looks at a swinging stone can have no experience that is in principle more elementary than seeing a pendulum. That's not so, because you could have two different competing elementary accounts, like numbering and counting, set theory and part theory. Or here is for the tendencies and propensities, that a tendency is the fall, and the propensity is the action or the push, say. Tendencies and propensities, then there's attenuation and dissipation, and oscillation and restitution. So a model of pendulum is usually given as that it's constantly oscillating and restitutive. At the same time, it's only as an account is that it's attenuative and dissipative, and then the balance of those. So when Kuhn says that there's not a more elementary account that can be given, it says there's two elementary accounts that either interpret each other. They're equal, equi-interpretable. So what Kuhn says is so, but it ignores that that doesn't discount there being two. But it suggests that the scientist who looks at a swinging stone can have no experience that is in principle more elementary than seeing a pendulum. So just talking about the pendulum or like swinging the bucket of water in a circle and noticing that it doesn't fall out, and how that establishes its own rotating frame in the light. Such as Lavoisier's comment, seeing oxygen and all that implied, where Priestley had seen only dephlogisticated air. Kuhn says, 1962, that though the world does not change with a change of paradigm, the scientist afterward works in a different world. Or that's an example of that. That the entire point of perspective is that theories are and ordinary theories, particularly, are perspectives, and then they're contingent. They're made to be picked up and put down and weighed and judged. And so the idea then for this account of where the theory has to be its own meta-theory about itself has that this gives like the last judgment is like, and this is why the final cause after the first principles and all the account that it's done. It has that it ignores that it's the greater strike of all these sorts of things. The sweep of it, as is put in this sort of account of the theory. The scientist afterward works in a different world. Well, it's one where his experiment was saw bear its outcomes. So the space goes on forever, and time goes back forever, and time goes on, is the idea. This is the thesis of the incommensurability of paradigms and ultimately a breakdown of communication across cultures or paradigms. Or not. Making after a deconstructive view, what must be a reconstructive view, because to be structuralist realists, otherwise it just all falls apart. A critical discussion and a comparison of the various frameworks is always possible. The author says, Popper can be forgiven for his making rather the short work of Kuhn's claims and talk of living in a different world. A critical discussion and a comparison of the various frameworks is always possible. It is just a dogma that the different frameworks are like mutually untranslatable languages. So here there's already like the super Euclidean and the super Archimedean. It lives in that. There is a language of words. It lives in that. So that's useful. The fact is that even totally different languages like English and Hopi or Chinese are not untranslatable, and there are many Hopis or Chinese who have learned to master English very well. An intellectual revolution often looks like a religious conversion. A new insight may strike us like a flash of lightning, but this does not mean that we cannot evaluate critically and rationally our former views in light of new ones. So this is explanations and the rehabilitations and the renovations, and then the apologetics to explain why what was thought was merely partial here in his usual account. And then I imagine I may have dog-eared this page when I was reading it before. Talking about Feyerabend, a philosopher, without a translation from one to the other, when he is looking at the world from the point of view of scheme A, he will be aware only of the existence of scheme B, but not of its content. So at most that he has failed to translate it in terms of scheme A. Not that it really differs from scheme A to the extent that it is really untranslatable. So here there's model theory, and so model theory and proof theory are equi-interpretable. And the model theory is structuralist. And according to the Euclidean and Archimedean, the geometrizations and arithmetizations, algebraizations in the middle. And those are actually magma-izations with regards to these sorts of accounts. So they're matters of the looser sorts of accounts, yet where model theory and proof theory are equi-interpretable. Logic and mathematics is super scientific in a sense. It's perfect. What Davidson seeks to show is that having language at all depends on having a largely correct view of the world. So this was from Falsification and Scientific Explanations by, I guess, the author over here. Falsification and Scientific Explanations. By Anthony O'Hare. So just finding an introduction here. In this book, I attempt to give a critical account of the main philosophical positions taken up by Sir Karl Popper in his published writings. And then he says, in Chapter 6, I consider and reject Popper's attempt to demarcate science from other activities in terms of falsifiability. Well, that seems unso. At the same time, I question whether Popper's supposedly realistic account of science is much different from instrumentalism, or whether his fallibilism leaves him with enough ammunition to launch an effective attack on relativistic philosophies of science. I suggest how relativism may be avoided on the basis of positions I adopted in criticizing Popper's epistemology. So that can be kind of rehabilitated as according to this overall kind of account. And so that was where we were reading from, was Chapter 6. So this is a thorough sort of work, and it's a very profound survey, and from 1980, and it reflects quite a thorough thing. Falsification and Scientific Explanations. A few minutes left then. Let's see, what is this? From Studies in Critical Social Sciences Toward a Dialectic of Philosophy and Organization by Eugene Gogol, G-O-G-O-L. So when I see something like this, I imagine it means communist. Eugene Gogol is a Marxist, humanist, activist writer. His books include The Concept of Other and Latin American Liberation and Raya Dunayevskaya, Philosopher of Marxist Humanism. Toward a Dialectic of Philosophy and Organization takes as a starting point the question, what philosophic organizational vantage point is needed for revolutionary transformations today? I'm for the middle class and against progressives playing off both ends against the middle and jerking it back and forth with all these polarizing diatribes of the sort of us versus them types of problems. So I'm sort of against utopians or dystopians in a sense. But I'm a firm believer in egalitarianism and equal rights and equal protections. And then for the success of meritocracy in an efficient free market capitalism. Where, for example, these days, as after the idea of Adam Smith's invisible hand, the idea being that supply and demand will induce individual and collective initiative to keep the market efficient and to make it fair and to result less of the asymmetries and the imbalances of the market. But then when the entire information economy has basically been inverted, the inversion of the scales of the economy, then the idea I came up with the other day is like, well, let's see, there's Adam Smith and he's got his invisible hand. And so that's so, and it's just kind of by definition, you're thinking of rational actors with no barriers to entry, that then it's an account for why things are so. Then the economies of scale have got to where it was like, the information economy of scale became like one giant clog of information. And so it has been inverted. See, where information essentially used to cost infinity to keep track of things, now it's inverted to cost essentially zero. And so the idea is that for Adam Smith's invisible hand is Adam Smith's invisible hand of the free market. There's this Adam Smith's obvious thumb on the inverted scale. The idea being that a thumb on the scale usually means affecting the balance of the things. So for this Smith-Samuelson economic law of robotics, say, where Samuelson is this another economist, and his account is like, well, everything in all of the world has a value. The trees and the wings and the flowers and the bees, they have value. And so this Smith-Samuelson, an account of like free market equity and value overall, and counting all the beings. Economic law of robotics is the idea that is possibly like a mathematical model where thusly the inversion about information is taken into account, because then for all the other aspects of watts, like watts per bit, well, what about like watts per heat or watts per cool, watts per food or watts per mile, and these other things that are not inverted can make for at least a natural model of how that thusly the economy can be described, and then to get back to where then that would go to for the common good, for equal rights, equal protections, and freedoms and liberties in the common good, then for something as to where that would advise again the restoring the primary goal of primary research and development, which is the overall macroeconomic indicator of research and development's contribution to the product of the economy, that the strong middle class and the education pipeline builds from that to arrive at what has made this as it is today. So that's just an economic theory is the way to be. Well then, gentle readers, that's today's talk, mostly about thea-theory, and a bit there at the end about a Smith-Samuelson economic law. Ooh, the Dictionary of Mythology. This is Evans' Dictionary of Mythology. Let's see what is the sample here from the middle. Sir Galahad and the Holy Grail. Galahad was a bit of a tortured sort. But it said he upheld kind of this highest ideas of the chivalry, and the virtues, and it also that he never found the Holy Grail. So this has got a bunch of knights, Gaia, also Gaia, or Ge, the earth goddess whose name is the first syllable of geography, geometry, geology, etc. The offspring of chaos, she of herself begot Uranus and Pontus. By Uranus, she was the mother of the Cyclops, the Hecatoncheires, the hundred-handed ones, and the Titans. By Pontus, she produced various sea creatures. The Erinyes, harpies, sprang from her when the blood of the mutilated Uranus fell on her. She was ultimately the source of all life, hence the ancient custom of placing a newborn child upon the earth. The Romans identified her with Tellus. Usually enough, since the accounts before patriarchy and matriarchy and these sorts of things. Well then, general readers, that'll be reading Foundations today. But mostly, again, as about perspective and projection in theory and the equi-interpretability of theory. And so being able to maintain a rational and critical account of things, to not be made a fool or a dupe or a knave, while yet be able to be from the tabula rasa on the prima facie, as of the naive, the innocent, in a sense. Has it that I shall so hope you enjoyed these readings today and these accounts, and I'll think to consider for the next one what they'll make of it. So, thea-theory, two theories in one. So long.